that we're going to hear this morning are the same ones that we used for our retreat this weekend. They're a wonderful reflection on community and certainly part of how we attain wholeness. The first one is from the book of Hebrews, chapter 10. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. The second is from Acts chapter 2. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers, and awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done throughout the apostles, and all who believed were together. Just take a breath in and allow those words to sink in. That's good stuff. Our church retreat on Friday night and Saturday was a blessing to and of this church community. We heard some great music from our talented Bill Bloom. We did some poetry, which is a deep reflection on ourselves. We did some reflection on our relationship with God, and with the community. We prayed, we laughed, some of us even cried. It's been said that community is God's desire for us, because at the end of the day, when we grow in our relationship with others, we're growing in relationship with God. So let's keep growing and hear some encouragement about community. As the story goes, when God first formed Adam from the dust, he was the only human on the planet. Can you imagine how lonely he must have felt? But it didn't last long. God said it wasn't good for man to be alone and decided to give Adam some company, so he created Eve. And that was the first little community the world ever saw. Do you remember the first community that you were ever part of? I remember being part of the Brownies in second grade. I recall after school one day, we were meeting on the field behind the school, and we were all in a circle, and we had on our little brown jumpers and brown beanies. I think we even had those little brown anklet socks. And we sang together that song. I only practiced it once, sorry. And join me if you remember. Make new friends, but keep the old. One is good and the other's gold. Make new friends, make new friends. So we sang that in a round, and we sang it over and over again. Wonderful memory, a wonderful memory. But unfortunately, I didn't remember any of the girls from that troop, not anymore, because we moved a few years after that. I would say my next community was probably being part of the color guard in high school. I was a flag twirler, and I loved it. We did have to wear those ugly white marching boots and those big fuzzy hats that always wanted to fall off. But it was another great experience. Then several years after I was first married, I joined a dream group. Yes, we actually sat around and we talked about our dreams. But it's amazing to hear how revealing of our lives our dreams can be. Then about 20 years ago, I joined a women's group. And it was a group that we did a lot of inner self-work. Now, I had a small group that was an offshoot of that, and we met monthly for the last 20 years. And I just recently stepped down from that group, but they will always and forever be a part of my life. I've also participated in several women's church retreats and led a few spirituality groups, and I have to say, there's absolutely something special about churches, about groups at church. The community is different from all the other groups I've been a part of. And I'm certain that it has something to do with God's grace being in our presence. Not that God's grace was not in the presence of the other groups, but they're different in a special way. Now, in our women's spirituality group on Sunday mornings, we share opening words that were very special, and I'd like to share them with you. Come, let us walk together. But wait, I may walk too fast or too slow for you, or a different distance than you. Sometimes we may walk with a lilt or a skip, and other times almost dragging. If I'm skipping and you're dragging, may we allow for these differences. Maybe, just maybe, we can adjust our tempo to feel gentleness in our steps.
May we pause, rest, and ponder. May we reflect on our walking together or apart. It's okay that we walk at different speed or distance. Maybe I will see or hear or perceive something new by walking with you, and you with me. Come, let us walk together.
May our walking together be in ministry. May we bring our own selves to ministry too. Our feelings, our fears, and our needs. May we bring the gifts of our being to minister to each other. May our connections deepen our spiritual journeys through community.
Thank you, Nancy, for helping me read. I love those words. They capture community and the concept of being real and vulnerable with one another. They also remind me of our retreat this weekend and how we shared our lives with each other. And I was going to share about Mia rolling over for the first time, but that's already been shared. But there was certainly a whoop of joy in the room at that time. The responses to the questions that we shared certainly reflected that we are all on a spiritual journey, but we're very different from one another. And yet, we're still able to walk together. Now, the artwork which is posted around the room, they were one of our exercises where we were to make a circle which represented the church, and then place yourself in the church and where you are in the church. Now, you'll notice that we didn't all follow directions. We didn't all start with the circle which represented the church. We were being creative. But the diversity of the artwork reflects the diversity in the room. Some people drew representations of themselves and all the groups that they participate in here at church, and others incorporated their families. I had a representation of the clergy and residents, and every male and female here, and even the children, but there weren't enough children. Now, two people represented themselves on the outside looking in, which may have been a very honest statement of how they view life. There's a scripture from Colossians chapter 2 which says, "Walk in God." In other words, we need people to help us grow spiritually. And in several passages, the Bible refers to our spiritual life as a walk. And why? Because it's not a sit-down thing. You're always growing, you're always moving, and your life is a journey. And on this journey, Galatians chapter 6 reminds us that community is also encouraging. Being in community gives you the chance to be around people at different stages of their faith journey, not just yours, and to bear their burdens alongside of them. Everyone has something to learn and something to teach. In fact, it's a great place to be a friend, to pursue a teacher, or train a student. What it really comes down to is lifting each other up, learning from one another, and being the friend that each of us needs. Yet for some folks, it can be hard to commit to community, especially if we're guarded or prefer solitude. As Americans, we love our independence. Our nation was founded on the Declaration of Independence. You know the sayings, "I've got to be me. I did it my way. I don't need anybody else to tell me what to do." Well, we think, and we've been taught, that happiness is the result of independence. That if I'm financially independent, if I'm relationally independent, if I'm independent in every way, then I'll be the happiest. And yet, we've never had more unhappy people. And why? Because it's not the answer. The truth is, happiness does not come from being independent, isolated, and living your life with all our barriers up and the masks that we keep on, and keeping people at an arm's distance. It's not the way to be happy. I know many people say happiness is a choice, and perhaps it is. Yet happiness comes from interdependence, from community. Have you ever noticed how sometimes in culture they portray Christians as a pretty boring bunch? Well, that couldn't or shouldn't be farther from the truth. We can be goofy and witty and just really fun to be around. Yes, our church community has a higher purpose, but it should also be enjoyable. I know some of you attended the Phillies game together on Friday night, and I can imagine you had a lot of fun. I did happen to see Jackie with his lovely green Phillies fanatic hat on. That looked like a lot of fun. And at the retreat, we had Gary's games, which kept us going. You should have seen him juggling. He had 6 balls up in the air all at one time. All right, I'm just kidding. He didn't really do that, but we did have a lot of fun. Well, this is a good little segue to also stick in another plug for Friday night's women's group. Friday night's potluck at Sandra's house. So if you're interested to see Sandra or myself, because we're going to have fun there too. Throughout Scripture, we're told to walk in the light. We're told to walk in love. We're to walk in the Holy Spirit. We're to walk as Jesus walked. We're to walk in wisdom. If you want to follow these teachings of Jesus and walk in the light and walk in love, don't just do it on Sunday. Do it every day in the context of all of your communities. And the important fact is, God never intended us to walk alone. We all know that it's important to spend time alone with God, but God didn't intend for us to live in isolation. We were specifically designed to crave and thrive in relationships with others. We're our best selves when we're experiencing life's highs and lows with others. And that means everyone, whether you're single or married, we all need community. Now, some of you might say, well, what's wrong with walking alone? I like to walk alone. I prefer to walk alone. I get my own way when I walk alone. Well, that's part of the problem, is you're not learning cooperation, you're not learning relationships, you're not learning love. But walking together is very supportive, because it keeps us from giving up. When other people are walking with you, they keep you going. Now, I heard an interview last week with Diana Nyad. She's an author, a journalist, a motivational speaker, and a long-distance swimmer. She first gained national attention in 1975 when she swam around Manhattan, which is only 28 miles. And then in 1979, when she swam from the Bahamas to Florida, that was about 102 miles. And on her 5th attempt, at age 64, she became the first person confirmed to swim from Cuba to Florida, which I think it was 110 miles, but without the aid of a shark cage. Can you imagine swimming for 53 hours without sleep? I can't imagine moving forward at all without sleep for 53 hours. But she didn't do it alone. She had a team. She had a whole community of people with her. I believe it was 35 people. She had a medical team, and she had weather people. She had jellyfish experts. And she had her best friend who whispered encouraging words to her when she wanted to give up, who talked her through her hallucinations as she kept moving. This friend also hand-fed her as she kept swimming. She said she was like a baby bird. With her mouth open, she would just come up to the side of the boat and open her mouth, and her friend would give her nourishment. But this was her 5th attempt at this swim. She was indeed one determined woman, and she trained for it for a very long time. By being present for one another, we in the church community become trained to accompany one another on our journey. Now, I don't know any of us who are long-distance swimmers, but there are many situations in life that no one should ever have to go through alone. No one should ever have to sit alone in a hospital waiting during a life or death surgery. No woman should have to wait alone while she's waiting back for a lab test from a problem pregnancy. No one should ever have to stand in an open grave alone. No man or woman should ever have to spend the first night alone when his wife dies or her husband dies. And no man or woman should have to spend the night alone when the wife walks out or the husband has walked out. And we know the list could go on and on. But we were not meant to face these crises alone. Unfortunately, some of these things are going to happen to some of us in our lifetime. And we need the support network in our life now because you don't know when the crisis is going to come. When someone is in crisis, it's not our job to fix their problem. And at that time, they probably don't want advice anyway. They just want someone to be there. You just sit there with them and be quiet. Perhaps you'll end up crying together. You don't have to say anything profound if you do, because usually once we start talking, that's when we get ourselves in trouble. So just be there with them. But some of you may remember the story of the little boy who went over to visit his elderly neighbor, who day after day she sat in the rocking chair on her front porch crying. She was grieving the loss of her recently deceased husband. Now when the little boy finally wandered back home, his mom asked him what they talked about. And he shrugged his little shoulders and said, "We didn't talk. I just helped her cry." That's another one of those wonderful little stories out of the mouths of babes and their wisdom. Community is one of God's answers to loneliness. It gives us people to accompany us on our life journey, and it helps us when we can't or don't see our blind spots. Like we may be making decisions that we think are smart, and one of our spiritual partners may offer us to rethink that decision as we may be headed in the wrong direction. Well, at the school where I also work, kids have to stop by my desk if they're late, and I noticed some of their blind spots, like toothpaste on their face, or that little booger that escaped and they haven't seen, so I hand them the tissue, or if their hair is standing up a little bit funny and they race to class without looking in the mirror. Now, I know I want somebody to tell me if I had any of those things. Now, yesterday morning at breakfast, Lance had a little poof of hair up there. And so I thought I'd mention it to him, and he goes, "Oh, that's okay, I like it like that." But we all had a good chuckle over it. I read a devotional this week, and the Reverend Donna Scaper from the Judson Memorial Church in New York City. And if you ever find yourself in New York City on a Sunday morning and want to go to a good church, that is absolutely one to visit. They are a very diverse group. They're doing a lot of justice work, and there are really a lot of interesting, unique people there. Anyway, Reverend Scaper shared about a few churches who are doing church differently or doing something different about their church. First Congregational Church in Newport, Rhode Island has removed its pews, like we have, but they opened space for new special windows. It will become, over time, a center for the arts. St. Luke's in the Field, which is an Episcopal church in Manhattan, has built a low-rise luxury building on its property in order to maintain its public ministries. They also have a marvelous park and garden and a school. Union Theological Seminary in New York City sold off a portion of its famous quadrangle to a luxury apartment building in order to do $150 million of restoration to the seminary, which will now live on to train a future generation. First Presbyterian Church in Queens built affordable housing on its property. And the chapel at Lacoste in Provence, France, created a large outdoor art museum where they say it married the local and the artistic. What they did, they apparently have an ancient chapel, but they built a huge glass building, a box around it. So it's a museum to go visit this ancient chapel, but it's also artwork. Fascinating ideas. So these churches were all thinking outside the box for new and different ways to move into the future. Now, our final group question yesterday was to talk about how we want our relationship with our neighbors to be, how we may envision the future of United Christian Church. Now, there are apparently pages of notes, that have to be compiled with suggestions, and just as a few of them are, well, you guys mentioned them already this morning about the church going green. That's wonderful, and we certainly look forward to hearing more about that. It was also suggested for us to have more of an online and social media presence. It was suggested that we have healing services. It was suggested that we have a community garden. All of these are wonderful ideas. And there will certainly be more opportunities to do visioning together. And I invite you to take some time and think out of the box. Be creative and perhaps pray about how you see our relationship with our neighbors, those outside these walls. United Christian Church is truly a wonderful community, filled with loving and caring persons. Attending a retreat like the 25 or so of us did this weekend was a great way to get to know each other better, to hear stories that we never knew, to support and encourage one another. If you are unable to attend the retreat and are interested in doing a little bit more of movement into wholeness, I invite you to reflect on and/or journal on these 4 following questions. What do you like about your relationship with God? Where do you want your relationship with God to go? What do you like about your relationship with yourself? And where do you want your relationship with yourself to go? They can be pretty deep questions, and they're more fun to answer with a friend, so if you have that opportunity to share them, I would recommend that. As your life journey encourages you to live into wholeness, let's not forget what we heard from Scripture. Consider how to stir up one another with love and good works, to encourage one another, to devote yourself to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and sharing of prayers, and all came upon every soul. May it be so. Amen.